I'm Elena Carter. I'm 29, and for most of my life I've felt like a shadow. I work as an executive assistant for Daniel Westwood, and I've spent 3 years walking a careful line between visible and invisible. My days start at 8:15 a.m., when I open the city's dull elevator doors, and end when I type the last email in a quiet office that feels more like a prison than a workplace. I've always believed I was good at blending in, at being the reliable background figure who never asked for more. Then one afternoon, around 2:30, Daniel's voice stopped me mid-type. He said he wanted me to accompany him to the Barrett Foundation Gala on Friday. My heart slammed into my chest like it was trying to escape its cage. I paused, fingers hovering above the keyboard, trying to make sure I wasn't dreaming. He said he thought I'd be an asset in front of philanthropic investors. I remember thinking I was just a steady hand on spreadsheets, not somebody who belonged in a ballroom. I heard the doubt in his voice, the silence after he said that, and I felt a small shift inside me. For the first time in a long time, I considered possibility instead of protocol. That night, I sat at my kitchen table staring at a picture of the gala venue. I printed the invitation and traced my finger across the gold script reading 5 p.m. Elegant gowns required. My reflection in the window behind the lamp looked exhausted and old. I closed my eyes and imagined stepping into that building as someone who mattered. My sister Mia helped me pick a dress. It wasn't designer. It was vintage emerald green, and it had belonged to my mother. I smoothed the fabric with trembling hands and fastened the clasp at 7:45 p.m. the night before. It smelled faintly of lavender. I held it up and whispered thank you without words. On the night of the gala, I left my apartment just after 6:30. I wore my mother's pendant, a simple teardrop crystal. I wrote in silence, thinking about how this invitation felt like someone had secretly spelled out my name in the stars. I arrived at the hotel entrance with the valet and stepped onto a red carpet I never thought I'd walk. Opening the massive glass doors felt like stepping through a threshold to a world I'd only read about. The lobby was glittering with crystal chandeliers and polished floors that echoed. I kept my head low. I could feel the eyes on me. I heard the whispers before I saw the gazes he brought his assistant. Is that her? Daniel found me standing still beside a pillar. He looped his arm through mine quietly and led me forward. His touch was steady. His expression said, "You're not alone." In that moment, I felt equal for the first time. We approached his friends. They were drinking wine, dressed to the nines, faces smooth with practiced grace. One of them smiled and said something about how brave it must be to bring someone like me. My throat tightened. My pulse pounded in my ears. I forced a smile and nodded. Daniel spoke up with calm authority and said I was there because I understood the mission, that I had insight that investors needed. His friends glanced at each other. The air shifted. I felt something quiet bloom in my chest. Maybe I was more than I thought. The evening proceeded in a blur of music toasts and gentle laughter. I answered questions about community outreach and unexpected past struggles. People listened to me. I spoke slowly, choosing honesty over polish. When I looked over at Daniel, his eyes showed pride and something else, something soft. Later, he led me onto the dance floor for a single dance. The room fell away. The lights dimmed to a glow. I felt the weight of my dress and the comfort of his hand. I thought my heart might crack from its own quiet wonder. By the time the night wound down, the gala's glamour felt less important than the way his eyes met mine when we left. Outside, the valet handed me my keys at 10:50 p.m. I reached for the door of the car with shaky certainty. He said thank you for being there. I said my pleasure, though. My voice sounded strange, like someone else's. On the drive home, I looked at the dress in the back seat. I thought about the life I'd stepped into tonight. I thought about who I might become if the world stopped defining me by shadows. I slipped the pendant from my neck and held it between my fingers. It felt heavy and hopeful at the same time. I got home and didn't take off my dress for an hour. I just stood in front of the mirror, letting the dress catch the dim light and the memory of how it felt to be seen. Then I changed back into sweats, curled into bed, and wondered if this invitation could mean more than just a night. Maybe it could be the beginning of something. I stepped into the grand ballroom just after 7:30 p.m. and felt it all hush around me. The crystal chandeliers cast a warm glow on every polished surface. I caught sight of my reflection in the glass walls. It looked like someone new, someone people could finally see. My heart pounded in a way I hadn't felt before. It was a mix of awe and a quiet thrill. Daniel led me forward. His hand rested gently on my elbow, firm enough to steady me, but light enough to let me choose each step. We moved through the crowd, and I could feel the shift in the air as we passed. I caught one soft gasp nearby. It sounded like someone realizing they'd misjudged. A woman in a silver dress smiled. She said she wasn't expecting to meet the assistant. I froze for half a second. My chest tightened. But Daniel stepped in with no hesitation. He said I had been instrumental in shaping what they all saw tonight. I nodded once. Their eyes turned to me. In that moment, something invisible peeled away. Daniel met my gaze again. This time it held pride. And something else. Something careful and warm. I wanted to say I noticed. Instead, I followed his lead. At 8 o'clock, the toasts began. Glasses lifted into the air. Someone clinked a fork to a champagne flute. Daniel raised his voice and introduced me. He didn't call me his assistant. He called me the reason half the night's ideas had moved from concept to reality. The words struck deep. My breath caught in my throat. I took a small step forward and spoke. At first, my voice trembled, but then it softened. I spoke about real people, local families, small ideas with real reach. I saw heads tilt. I heard the silence. People were listening, not politely, fully. Later, Daniel asked me to dance. A soft piano waltz began at around 8:40. His hand reached for mine. I hesitated for a second, then placed my hand in his. We moved slowly. I counted steps in my head, but my body began to respond on its own. He kept his hand steady at my waist. He didn't lead forcefully, just enough to make space for me. His breath warmed the air between us. He leaned slightly closer and said I carried myself with grace. I smiled before I could think to. It felt like the most honest moment I'd had in years. When the dance ended, we returned to the edge of the room. There, near a curtain drawn just far enough to filter the light, we stood side by side. He asked how I was feeling. I told him it was like stepping into someone else's story. He looked at me for a second too long. Then he said he hoped the story had just begun. We didn't speak much after that. We didn't have to. People approached. One older man thanked me for something I had said during the speech. Another woman said she'd never seen someone speak from both heart and facts so clearly. Each comment surprised me. I felt like I was floating, but my feet stayed grounded. At 9:15, Daniel took me outside. The balcony was quiet. The city lights looked like a distant constellation. He said very quietly that he saw me, not just as an employee, as a person. I didn't know what to say. My throat tightened. I nodded. The moment held its own kind of peace. Back inside, we shared dessert. I tasted something rich and soft. It reminded me of something from childhood, but better. Daniel brushed a crumb from my sleeve. I laughed quietly. It felt like laughter I hadn't let out in a long time. When we left around 10:45, he walked me to the car. His hand brushed mine once more. Not by accident. I looked at him. He didn't say much, but the way he looked at me said enough. I whispered, "Thank you." He nodded. The door closed softly behind me. The ride home felt unreal. The lights blurred outside. I stared at the city and thought about everything that had changed. Not out there. In me. I touched the edge of my pendant. It warmed in my hand. At home, I stood in front of the mirror again. The dress caught what little light remained. I stayed like that for a long time, just watching myself, not with judgment, with wonder. I didn't want to take the dress off. Not yet. I wasn't ready to return to being unseen. The Monday after the gala started like any other. I walked into the office at 8:15 a.m., coffee in hand, hair pulled back coat still damp from the rain. But something felt different. Not outside. Inside me. Daniel looked up when I stepped in. He smiled, a real one, not the polite tilt of lips he usually gave. He asked how I was feeling after the weekend. My voice stumbled on a quiet fine. He nodded slowly. He didn't push. But I felt his eyes linger. Over the next few days, something small began to shift. We started meeting each morning in the break room. At first, it was coincidence. Then maybe not. He poured my coffee once without asking how I took it. He just knew. I wondered when he had noticed. We started talking more. Not just about work. He asked what book I was reading. I asked what music he played in the car. Our conversations grew longer, softer, more like windows than walls. I remember one moment on a Wednesday morning. We were reviewing notes for a donor pitch, and he paused to ask if I thought it was too much. I looked up surprised. He had never asked for my instinct before. I said I thought it was honest. He smiled again and said that was all he wanted. It felt like a dance we didn't know we were in. Some days we stepped closer. Others we stayed still. But I began to feel like I mattered. Not just as a part of his schedule, as a part of his day. One afternoon around 2:45, he stopped by my desk. He asked if I would accompany him to a town hall meeting the next morning. He said the project had drawn some concern in a local community, and he thought I might help translate the message. I froze for a second, then nodded. We drove out the next morning at 7 sharp. The highway was quiet and the sun hadn't fully risen. The sky was the soft gray of old photographs. We didn't talk much, but the silence wasn't awkward. It felt like space for breathing. The community center was small. Folding chairs, coffee in styrofoam cups, parents holding babies, a teenager with a notepad in the back row. Daniel looked out of place in his suit, but he didn't flinch. When it was his turn to speak, he introduced himself calmly. He explained the project, why it mattered, what it could bring. But the room stayed cold, faces stiff, arms crossed. Then he stepped back and handed me the microphone. I wasn't expecting that. I looked at those faces. I saw what he didn't. Fear. Worry about being forgotten. I said my name softly. I said I had grown up in a small town too, that I knew what it meant to watch the world move on without you. Then I spoke about why I believed in the work we were doing. Not the numbers, the people, the programs we were building that would stay long after the ribbon cutting. I told them I would come back. I promised that their voices would be part of the next step. When I finished, I stepped back and felt my hands shake. Later, a woman came up to me. She had tears in her eyes. She said, "Thank you," that I had said what she had wanted to say for years. I didn't know what to reply, so I just held her hand. In the car ride home, Daniel didn't speak right away. Then he said he was glad I had come. I looked out the window. The road stretched ahead. I whispered that I was glad too. Back at the office, things didn't return to how they had been. They deepened. The way he looked at me changed. Like he was seeing not just who I had been, but who I might become. He asked for my thoughts before meetings. He sent me articles about books we had discussed. One morning, he left a sticky note on my keyboard. Just a single line. "You were brave yesterday." I stared at it for 5 minutes before tucking it into my purse. One Friday evening, I caught my reflection in the glass door on the way out. My coat was the same, my shoes scuffed at the toe. But something in my eyes had changed. I stood a little straighter. I looked like someone who believed she mattered. I didn't know where this would go. I wasn't planning a storybook ending, but I knew something real was growing. Between him and me. Between who I had been and who I was learning to be, and somehow that was more than enough. I left the office on a rainy Thursday afternoon. It was 3:15 p.m. The sky outside looked the way I felt. Gray, heavy, hard to read. I had packed my things quietly. No grand goodbye. Just a letter left on his desk. 3 lines. No blame. Just space. I had seen her in his office the day before. Not just anyone. His former fiancé. Laughing softly. Touching his arm the way I never dared. I waited by the door for 5 seconds. Maybe more. Then I turned and walked away. My stomach didn't just drop. It collapsed. He never explained. He didn't chase. And that somehow hurt more than anything. I took a bus upstate that weekend. Somewhere quiet. A place with porches and chipped paint, and the kind of silence that lets you hear your own hurt. I stayed with a friend from college. She didn't ask much. Just gave me space tea and blankets that smelled like pine in old summer. I spent the first 2 days walking. The roads were damp and the trees still bare from winter. I thought I would cry, but I didn't. My sadness was quieter than that. It settled in my bones like cold. At night I replayed every moment. His eyes, his words, that dance. I wondered if I had imagined it all. If maybe I had seen a version of him he never meant to show. Maybe I had built something in my mind that he had never planned to stay in. Back in the city, Daniel sat at his desk. My notes still there. He didn't understand at first. He thought I needed a break, until he tried calling. The number rang out. No voicemail. He looked through his calendar, tried to trace it back. The meeting, the laugh, the expression on my face as I passed him that morning. It hit him all at once. She had shown up uninvited. She needed closure. But Elena had seen something else. Something unfinished. He sat there long after the lights were off. The city glowing outside. He remembered how I looked in the ballroom light. How I laughed when he brushed sugar off my coat. How I stood on that community center stage and made strangers trust us. He realized he had known it for weeks, but never dared say it. He needed me. Not because I made the schedules run or meetings flow, because when I was there, he felt less alone. He called every hotel in the region, every bed and breakfast. He didn't say who he was. He just asked if they had a guest named Elena. 3 days later, just after 6 in the evening, he showed up on the porch. I was watering the porch plants. The can tilted in my hand when I saw him. I didn't speak. He didn't either. He stepped closer. Slowly. Like every footfall was asking permission. I said nothing as he sat across from me. Just the sound of crickets and one wind chime brushing the corner beam. He finally spoke. Said he missed me. That he had let something slip by that he didn't know how to name. I looked down. Said maybe it was never his to keep. He said he had been afraid. Not of me. Of feeling something real. That every connection before had been polished, easy staged. And then I showed up with quiet hands and honest words and made him forget he was lonely. I asked why he didn't stop me. He said he didn't know how to chase what he thought he didn't deserve. We sat in silence, the air heavy but not cruel. Then I asked him the question that had kept me up for days. Was she the one? He shook his head. Said the only thing she had ever done right was remind him what he could lose. I didn't cry. but something inside me softened. He reached into his coat and handed me a folded sheet. It was the donor report I had written 3 weeks ago. He had circled a line I had forgotten I wrote. It read, "What we build only matters if someone believes it's worth building with you." He looked at me, asked if I still believed that. I said I did. He asked if I could give him a second chance to build something, not a company. Something with walls and windows and mornings that started with coffee and ended with trust. I didn't say yes, not right away, but I didn't ask him to leave either, and maybe that was enough for now. The office looks different now. Not just the layout, the energy. There's warmth in the air, laughter echoing through glass walls. I walk past the new interns and smile. They don't know what came before, but I do. Every tile and hallway still holds our story. It's been a year since I came back. Not as an assistant, as a partner. Daniel asked me to co-lead the new community foundation. At first, I hesitated. Not because I didn't believe, but because I was scared to be seen again. Not just as his, as myself. The first board meeting was at 9:30 a.m. on a Thursday. I remember the nerves. The coffee in my hand shaking, but then he looked at me from across the table. Just a small nod. It calmed me more than any speech. We built something together. Slowly, quietly. We funded local libraries, started after-school art programs, helped small towns open farmers' markets again. It wasn't glamorous, but it was good. At night, we would sit on the back porch of his brownstone, my feet in his lap. His head leaned against my shoulder. Sometimes we didn't talk. Other nights, we'd laugh until the neighbor's dog barked in protest. I learned he was funny in the mornings. That he burned toast but made perfect scrambled eggs. That he hated small talk but remembered the birthdays of every kid from our scholarship program. We weren't perfect. Some days we argued over contracts. Other days we argued over dinner plans. But we kept choosing each other. Over and over. The gala this year was different. Not just because I helped plan it. Because I walked in on his arm, not behind him. My dress fit like a memory I'd once been afraid to wear. He held my hand through the whole night. At 9:15 p.m. the lights dimmed. He got up to speak, his voice calm, steady. And then halfway through he turned to me. He said we all build things that last. But the most important thing he ever built wasn't a company. It was a life, with someone who taught him how to hope again. My breath caught. I felt something stir inside me. Then he placed his hand on mine. Slowly, firmly. We left the party early, around 10:45. I was tired. He kept glancing at me, smiling in that way that made me blush. At home, he made me sit, brought me a cup of warm milk, then placed a small gift in my hands. Inside was a letter, not from him, from her, his late wife. I looked up stunned. He said he had been waiting for the right time. The letter was short, honest. It said that if he ever loved again, she hoped it would be someone who could make him laugh, who wouldn't flinch at his silence, who would remind him life was still kind. I sat there for a long time, silent. He said he hadn't understood it until me. I wiped a tear. Maybe more than one. Then I said thank you for trusting me with her words, for letting me be part of a love that stretched wider than one lifetime. Later, he placed a hand gently on my belly. The baby kicked once, then twice. He laughed. A soft, quiet sound. It filled the room. We don't have a perfect love story, but we have a real one. We chose each other, not out of convenience, out of courage. And when people ask how we started, I smile. We didn't. We became.